Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malaika Mahlatsi, and I will be facilitating this session for the launch of Dr. Ruth Murambadoro's book. And before we go into the details of that conversation and that work, let me begin with a brief introduction of who Dr. Ruth is and the work that she has been doing as pertains to this research. Dr. Ruth Murambadoro is a senior lecturer in peace, security, and governance with over 7 years' experience in conducting transdisciplinary research in marginalized communities in fragile states. She holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Political Science, a Master of Art in Political Studies, a BA Honors in International Relations, and a Bachelor of Political Science, all from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. Additionally, she has obtained postgraduate split management, African thought leadership, political psychology, post-conflict transitions, Institute, the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute, and the Central Europe of Directors of the African Studies Association, the United States, as a representative of the Emerging Scholars Network from the years 2016 to 2018, and as a committee member of the Transformation Committee of the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Pretoria from 2015 to 2018. Since 2011, she has been involved in various research projects which were funded through the Codesria Collaborative Research Network, the African Peace Building Network, the Templeton Foundation, Irish Aid, and the Social Science Research Council, as a runner-up for the Africa Thesis Award under the African Studies Center in Leiden at Leiden University in the Netherlands. She's a recipient of the Visiting Research Fellowship from the Center of African Studies, Cambridge, in 2019, and the TWAS DFG Corporation Visits Award in 2019 as well, a Guest Researcher Fellowship Award from the Nordic Africa Institute in 2020. Additionally, she was a recipient of the US-based African Studies Association Presidential Fellowship Award, a 3-time recipient of the Next Generation of Social Sciences in Africa Fellowship Award, a recipient of the African Pathway Doctoral Fellowship under the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, and the Tax Young Research Leader Award from the University of Pretoria in 2017. Some of her research has been published by Rowman and Littlefield Publishers, the African Journal of Conflict Resolution, the Strategic Review of Southern Africa, and Kunjenda Amani, to name but a few. Her research experience and interests include systems, governance, democratic citizenship, gender, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and sexual and gender-based violence. What a very impressive CV. Thank you very much, Dr. Murambadoro. You do serve as quite an inspiration for us as emerging scholars. I'd like to welcome you to this session to discuss the launch of upcoming Transitional Justice in Africa, the Case of Zimbabwe. Can you perhaps, Dr. Murambadoro, take us through a brief journey of what the research process has been in this book, and what are some of the core themes that you are exploring in your research?
Thank you so much, Malaika, and a warm welcome to everyone who is participating in the launch of a monograph that I wrote and completed early this year, but it took me a couple of years to get to this project in its final packaging. I just want to thank you for making time to listen and participate in the process that brought me to this book, and why it is an important output that I have had to develop. I just want to tell you that my research is based on the work that I conducted between 2015 to 2019 in 2 main communities, and the 3rd community, particularly drawing from participants who emerged from that community but are now living in the diaspora. within Zimbabwe, I conducted my fieldwork in Mudzi and Buhera. As you can see on the map, Buhera is in Manicaland, and Mudzi is in Mashonaland East. So those are the two communities that I decided to do my work on, particularly because I was born in Buhera. It is my rural home, and it is a place I have witnessed a lot of things happening, and the transitions that have happened due to political contestations within Zimbabwe, and the kind of fractures that have happened to the community because of the things that are happening at a national level. And I really wanted to go back to my roots and try and understand what it is that's going to become of our people if this is the kind of reality we are faced with. Every other 5 years we have elections, and every other time there is that constant cycle of violence, which has now been entrenched in the psyche of the people. And also not forgetting that even if we look back beyond the independence in 1980, these communities did witness the liberation struggle. So there is a lot of trauma that's laying us around the communities. And being somebody who was born and raised in these communities which are fractured, I needed to understand deeply what it is that could be done to rebuild our communities. That's why I chose to focus on Buera and also Mudzi, because largely that's where my father spent much of his time working soon after gaining independence up until the early 2000s. So I really had a deep connection to both these communities and needed to understand a little bit more what it is that is causing the fractures and what it would mean to rebuild communities that are fractured by political tensions. So that is the basis on which I chose to write about these two communities, because they are special to me. I have a direct relationship with them. And so I began from a point where I wanted to really understand, being brought up in a family where when we have disagreements, right, we usually sit down and talk about what the issues are. And being somebody who's grounded in understanding that I am because you are, and we all have a greater cause in our life, which we are called to consistently consider in our day-to-day living or livelihood, such that if I am to think of any actions that I have to do, I have to always remember that my actions, have the ability to cause a positive outcome and a negative outcome. And in the event that I've caused a negative, my actions have caused a negative outcome, what is it that I need to do to ensure that, the harmony that ought to be in society remains in balance and is restored? So it is from that point that I began to engage with the broad literature, of transitional justice, which is basically peace-building processes that are put in place to help communities that have been affected by conflict, that have been affected by war, that have been affected by violence. To bring it home to South Africa, we've seen with the TRC as one of the mechanisms that are put in place, especially when a state has transitioned into what would consider a democratic dispensation. But of course, we cannot consider transition as something that is static or has an end point and a start point, but rather communities are in constant transitions because we always often have disagreements. We have differences in our opinions and ways of doing things, but then we always also have to think about finding a common ground that helps us to work together, because when we work together, we have the ability to do more, right? So I'm coming from that grounding in my upbringing of how it is we are able to work together and how do we overcome the differences that we might have as human beings. So I began to engage with literature on transitional justice and figured that most of the peace building efforts that are often done in conflict-stricken communities, particularly if we're looking in Africa, there has been, largely a top-down approach. When we're talking of top-down approach, here we're looking at the emphasis on the government putting in place mechanisms to, bring justice to those who have been affected by violence. But in most cases, the interests of political actors become a determining factor in how those mechanisms are implemented and to what extent, they can go deep enough to dissect the issues and how people in different contexts have been affected. So I needed now to understand from people on the ground in the context of Zimbabwe, where since 1980, we've not necessarily had any mechanism, especially at a national level, that has helped to address conflict at the local level, getting deep into people's, into people's communities, because the focus has been in bringing political actors to the table, helping them to iron out their differences. But the reality of the matter is that this conflict is deeply entrenched in people's communities. They affect people at the family level, right? If we're saying conflict affect people at the family level, it means the future of families is being threatened by political contestations. Now, I needed to understand how it is families are able to rebuild themselves when they have been affected by political tensions or these political contestations that we are seeing in Zimbabwe. And when I'm talking about political contestations, I'm looking particularly in the period 2000 to 2008, where there was a huge polarization amongst two main political organizations, where we have the so-called ruling party, the one that's in government, which is ZANU-PF, and we also have, opposing parties or parties that are bringing competition to this democratic space in the form of the opposition parties, particularly in the communities I was working on. It was the movement for democratic change. Of course, it has its multiple factions, but as I was engaging with people, they would be relating to movement for democratic change as a collection, as a collective, and how the main contestations between these two political parties have actually torn families apart to the extent that a brother or a sister can actually sell out another brother, right? Because they have to prove from a party line that they are loyal. Now, I needed to understand from families, how then do they address such betrayal within families? Because in any case, if there's a funeral, people still need to attend those funerals. If there's a wedding, people still need to attend those weddings together as families. If there's any gathering, people still need to meet one another. So how is it people would continue to engage on other social activities, yet at a political level, there has been such tension which break down the family bond? So those are the things I was grappling with and needed to understand deeply. So in the image that you can see, it's me engaging with some of the community members, trying to understand in their own perceptions, what it is that they have witnessed. How do they explain violence? So you find in the book, I capture notions of violence from people's own understanding, and the terms that come out is things like mirijonga, jowe jowe, vongambo poto, and in themselves you can see how there's a tearing of families at a very deep level, because you'd find that if one is to talk of vongamvonga, it means there is a disruption of the harmony that's meant to be in a community, whereas they would ordinarily consider themselves to be peaceful. But when there's political tension, the society itself no longer has harmony. And I needed to understand what this harmony means. So in engaging with the participants, I then realized that, they understand themselves as living beings, but also as having a deeper connection with, their society in terms of, the generation before them, which are the ancestors, as well as the generation that is to come. Now, how then do they understand the harm that happens to them when political contestations occur? I then realized that, whereas when we're looking at political violence or state-sanctioned violence, we tend to look at how people are affected economically, we tend to look at how people are affected physically, and of course there's talk about structural violence in terms of how people are excluded because of the decisions that are made by political actors to punish others, and then they don't have privileges that other people in the society have. But also you then realize that at a much psychological level, when we look deeply into the psychosocial well-being of the community, you realize that this hurt actually is carried into their metaphysical realm, where it is not just their current existence that is affected, but also their future and the greater ancestral community, where you begin to see people relating their misfortunes to the occurrences of violence that they witness in their society. So it is now at that level that I wanted to understand if people are now also relating that the economic hardships they are facing and the other misfortunes they are facing, it's because there is anger from the metaphysical realm, and they are no longer, fortunes being brought forward because there is that anger. How do they reconcile with those, those tensions that have been carried over into the metaphysical realm? And what would it mean for the society to be at peace with each other? So here, peace is not necessarily just the absence of physical violence or the absence of structural violence, but it's actually a disposition within themselves where they can, feel that there is harmony between the living dead, and the future unborn, which was coming out strongly when I was engaging with participants to say, for them, justice is not something that you do to somebody, but it is a process in which you bring back the essence of humanity, you bring back the underlying values of their community, where you respect one another, there is cooperation, and there is also the valuing of all human beings, and it's grounded in dignity and not necessarily just people's rights. So I needed to get that understanding, and it is through engagements with participants that I began to build now my book over the 5 years that I was doing my research. Firstly, as a PhD student, but also as a postdoctoral fellow. And some of the images you could see, it also include engagements I was having in different platforms, including being part of the Social Science Research Council, part of the African Studies Association in Africa, where we would attend conferences, and through engagements with colleagues, we would be sharpening each other. So in terms of collecting my data, apart from engaging with people in the local communities, I also went as far as to sit now in the public hearings of the National Peace and Reconciliation Bill, which is an act that was being developed to try at a national level to put in place mechanisms to address past injustices in Zimbabwe. And I needed now to have a reconciliation between the engagements I was having with people on the ground within communities, as well as the national debate, the national discourse, what it is that people were thinking of when they were talking about rebuilding Zimbabwe, addressing past injustices. And I then noticed a clear competition in terms of ideas about what would it take to rebuild Zimbabwe. So you'd find from a political front, if we're looking at the ruling party, actors within the ruling party, you could almost clearly see in the engagements where their notion of dealing with the past is centered on, well, what it is that is there to deal to talk of. We need to forget. I recall in one of the conversations, in one of the public hearings, where one would say we don't need to talk of eating stale food. We don't have to we need something fresh. So it's almost like going back to the past is asking us to eat pap that has been overnight pap or stale pap, and we don't need to go back to all that. It's done when we signed the Unity Accord. It was done, and also when we set and did the political agreement, it was done, which then was reinforcing the notion that these contestations that are happening in Zimbabwe are only at a political level, and it's about the political actors, but this then ignores the people on the ground who are affected deeply. So I then was now trying to grapple with the disconnection between the agenda being discussed at a national level and what people actually want at the community level. So those are some of the processes that I went through. Of course, I completed my PhD under the supervision of Dr. Corey Vilenga and Prof. Alois Mulambo, who were very good in helping me shape my ideas. But once I had finished my PhD, as I went back to the community and trying to write my book, I then, for the first time, subjected myself to participating in elections, the 2018 elections, and trying to see, the so-called tensions, that participants were talking about, to try and contextualize, not to say they are so-called, but actually to try and get from the first hand, what are the tensions that tend to occur during election periods, and how does this, polarize the society? How does this engender more harm on communities that I was working on? And I then, even if we to look at the 1st August 2018 shootings by the military, and how some of those incidents have still been ignored, and yet we by 2018, we were already talking of a peace commission, being at a stage where it's being established. And of course, there was a subsequent commission of inquiry, which was led by former Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe from South Africa, and how all those things at a national level continuously focus on resolving political differences among actors, and nothing much tangible on the societies themselves. So I then got the opportunity to travel to Colombia and try and understand if we're doing justice, from a community's understanding of justice, bringing in healing and bringing in the spiritual element to transitional justice, what would it entail? As you would see in one of the communities that we visited in Colombia, the transitional justice processes really centered on trying to bring in, the healing at a spiritual level, at a psychosocial level, and they had various rituals that were performed, which were able to get the communities to reconnect with those who were deceased, and also to reconnect with people that were affected, some who may have died, but also some who are present, so that they bring that renewal of their essence, because there is an understanding in there being that when violence has occurred, it does not only affect them physically, but it also destroys the harmony within the metaphysical realm. So those are some of the things that informed my book. And of course, I also managed to sit in Cambridge and write the book under the mentorship of Dr. Adam Branch, as well as Prof. Nsebeza, who were quite influential in my writing, and also, of course, Dr. Jimmy Sentongo, who I find to have been great mentors as I was writing. But just to give you a sense of then what are some of the things that came out in the book in terms of, from a spiritual understanding, from a community understanding, what it means to do justice. So one of the people I cover in the book is now living abroad in Asia for their own, to maintain their anonymity. I'll be referring to the place of location as Asia. And during the 2008 elections, they were affected by political violence, particularly being attacked because of accusations of being, supporters of the opposition. And yet this person was a civil servant and had been involved as an election educator, they were part of the election monitoring guys, and also who go in on behalf of government to do voter education and things like that. Basically, this is somebody who was appointed from the community to represent the community and working in the government to do voter education. But when it came to 2008 election, they then were told, you are now a sellout, which also is something that comes up in the book when we're now trying to think about the power of language in enforcing violence within communities, where you look at how in Zimbabwe, once you're called a sellout, it means the response that people give you is one of trying to discipline, it's one of trying to exterminate you, and that has a lot of damage on the well-being of the community. So those are the things I was trying to carve out on how, because this participant, Bamin Mugezo, was labeled as sellout, the people who actually contributed to his attack are close family members who were neighbors. And the response of the family to this betrayal by one of their own was to excommunicate the other family members who contributed to the attack that happened on Bamin Mugezo. So I wanted now to understand from Bamin Mugezo's own viewpoint that if you're saying at a national level there is no space for justice to occur, now at a community level within your own family, and you're saying there was a huge divide in your family at the time you were attacked, and it caused the family elders to actually say, you know what, these are the members we're going to exclude them from the family, and they're no longer part of us. What was that? And he explained how there is great symbolism in ostracizing family members within their realm. So I'm just going to read how that happened, which is chapter 3 of the book, which looks at harm, displacement, and interpersonal violence. So there was a family gathering which we called Dari, right, which is a community, which is a court process within the family, at a family level. And at that family gathering, they decided to excommunicate Babamdiki Mudinda. It was an act of justice that was sanctioned from their shared values. Their justice involves kutsiura, kuraira, kuranga, and kudzoredzanisa, which means chastising, giving counsel, instilling discipline, and reconciling. Hence, kuramwanana sekuru, which is now being ostracized by the uncles. And here, when we talk of uncles, it's not just relating to male figures, but also it's a body it's a position of actors within the family that also include other elderly people who could be aunts and the grandmothers as well. Would say it was an extreme measure of kuranga, which is discipline, in that it is tantamount to being cursed. So you now carry this burden of being excluded. And when you're being excluded, it means even the prospects that come from your ancestors, who are the guardians of life, would be cut short, would be cut off until you've come up to reconcile. So it is their cultural belief that when you have been ostracized, you become exposed to a lot of misfortune. For example, losing a job or falling ill or failing to get a medical diagnosis. In their social cultural understanding, nothing happens without a cause. Both the good and bad in life have a spiritual force that drive it. When such misfortunes occur, they tend to turn to spiritual and religious figures for solutions. For example, consulting traditional healers or prophets. These figures could advise that there's a bad omen that needs to be rebuked, but this process usually requires some family members to assist. If one has been disowned, it becomes difficult to get support from the family, especially when some issues require a mother figure. Mamnin Mugezo shared that in the family, there are cultural ceremonies and rituals where the mother figure plays a crucial role. For example, burial, unveiling of a tombstone, lobola. When such events occur, there is an expectation that the mother figure will be present to perform the rites of a mother, which ensures the event is successful. A mother is considered the lifeline of a clan, a family in the sense that she brings forth life in beings through birth, but before one is birthed, they are carried in the womb of a woman, which is the incubator that gives them life throughout the gestation period. There is a special spiritual bond between the living and the dead, embodied by the spirit of a mother, in that the mother figure is bestowed with blessings, which they usher to their offspring. When one is ostracized by a mother figure, symbolically, the ancestral family disowns the individual. And here the mother figure includes the uncles, includes the mother as in biological mother who gives birth. So in that act, there was in their community a sense of justice being done. So I asked, was this justice? I was intrigued by the explanation that Bamni Mugezo gave around the recourse his family took to deal with the relational harms that occurred in the 2008 electoral violence. It became clear to me that justice had been administered at the family level to repair the interpersonal relations. However, I remained uncertain as to whether the resolution taken at the family caucus met the justice needs of Bamni Mugezo as a person who experienced direct violence. I therefore asked him the question, how about at a personal level? Could you say justice was served? To which he replied, yes, I think so, because in whatever circumstance as siblings or relatives in our culture, we are there to help each other in times of need, sorrow, or happiness. When there are challenges, we ought to work together and cover each other's back. So if you are found partaking in activities with the enemy, then you are the enemy to the family. The family can discard you as punishment, but also to distance themselves from the bad character you have become, especially when you have shown to be someone unreproachable, to be an unreproachable person. They will be accusing you of failing to be responsible enough to protect your own. So it is as good as you have caused the death or the harm that is befallen the other person. So when the uncles deject you, there is justice in the sense that you are an enemy and we cannot continue liaising with the enemy. Also, they surrender you to the universe for your judgment. They will leave you standing on one foot and you are no longer complete. You are disabled. So when you do not have that connection to your greater family, you become, they consider you to be incomplete because in this setting, there is the understanding that you belong somewhere, and we all as human beings often want, we find our meaning and our sense of being and identity through belonging to our, especially in this instance, to your roots, that connection to your family. And it was quite powerful to hear from participants that at a family level, they've now begun to find ways to protect themselves from the interference, coming at from political contestations by ensuring that those within their communities who become participants in political violence are actually excluded or disassociated with, and that in itself has been serving as a means of reproach, but also in other ways that they've been able to rebuild harmony is where they have these family caucuses, and in many cases the people who have participated in contributing to political violence, you find that they end up asking for forgiveness and taking measures to rebuild relations within the family. And I noted that when there is harmony at the family level, it also transcends to the community. And when there is harmony in the family and the community, there is also harmony within the self, because they find their sense of being through those interdependent relations they have with one another. I would say that for me was something that is quite different from the overbearing emphasis that's often there to try and just focus on political actors and bring political actors to the table and reconciling them, instead of also going deep at the community level to find reconciliation, to find how people within communities rebuild themselves when they have been affected by political violence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruth, for that and there's a lot that we got out of it, but there are some few things that I want us to touch on. You spoke earlier about, you made emphasis, obviously, of the fact that this book seeks to center the lived experiences of the people in Zimbabwe, right? That it seeks to move away from the master themes that have always dominated the narrative, that are, things about, the big men that have defined the political milieu in Zimbabwe. But I'm very curious about one thing in particular, and I know that you said that you looked particularly from the 2000 period, from the post-2000 period, but I want us to take it a little bit back to the 1980s period, right? I want us to go back to the 1980s period, because I think when we speak about transitional justice in Zimbabwe, it becomes, we are not going to do justice to the conversation if we don't talk about why this is very important. It's very important because what has happened there has shaped a lot of post-independence identity in Zimbabwe, right? And it's shaped a lot of the conflicts and the tensions that happen in Zimbabwean society today. A few weeks ago, there was a protest at the Zimbabwean consulate in South Africa, in solidarity with obviously the political situation, the very arbitrary arrests of journalists and ordinary citizens in Zimbabwe that's taking place. And I found it very curious because I was part of that protest. One of the things that I found very curious at the protest was that there we were as South Africans and as Zimbabweans in the diaspora, speaking out about a very atrocious system that is that shapes Zimbabwe today. But we also had a lot of conversation taking place there in that protest about many other instances where Zimbabwean people have felt excluded from the Zimbabwean society, right? And where their identity has been largely shaped by the post-independence violence and tensions that have taken place. And I remember during the protest, there was a lot of people holding up placards that were saying, we want Matebele we want cessation from Zimbabwe. We want to bring back the Republic of Mtwakazi and so on. And that is not something new, right? It's something more over time, that there are people in Zimbabwe who feel, for them and therefore national identity, they feel that they need to be out of this country. It does not belong to them, and it is not their country. And I think that's one of the things about the lack of justice that always is such a very deeply problematic thing, that in so denying people justice, you basically deny them of their very legitimate claim. I wonder what your experiences have been, if you've perhaps, and maybe it might not necessarily have been in your own experience as a scholar and a researcher of different people in Zimbabwe, particularly in different provinces. And I want to be very deliberate to say those in Matebele land in particular. What has been your feeling about the ongoing tensions, the ongoing tribal tensions that obviously are born from the political violence of the 1980s, for which there has not been really meaningful justice?
Thank you so much, Malaika. So fortunately, at some point, I did do research in Matebeleland. I did that for my master's studies, and I wrote about the Matebeleland genocide, drawing from experiences of survivors of the genocide, which really is a regrettable episode in Zimbabwe's history, because of the level of harm that was committed by political actors and for political interests, which continues to shape the trajectory of Zimbabwe today, and the ignorance that is often portrayed, where there's denialism, and in some cases, you'd find, shifting the blame on other actors, and failing to acknowledge the role that, for example, the government played in administering violence to innocent citizens, because they're saying they're pursuing so-called dissidents, which is also a problematic thing. So I would say the challenge, or the burden that's facing Zimbabwe is one where, there's invention of identities by political actors. And when these identities are created, they have a way of alienating those who are not favored by the identity for which they've created for themselves. So here I'm talking about, if you look during the 1980s, the Gukurahundi genocide, there was the mention of people, or referring to people as cockroach. And because you've been labeled a cockroach, there's need to exterminate you. And we've seen this narrative continuing, and that's where the challenge lies, where of course we cannot ignore that it was a political settlement that got us to independence in 1980, and we cannot ignore to question what happened at Lancaster House when the negotiations were being done. But I think the sad thing also is how these tensions were actually brewed even before we got to 1980. If people look at 1975 and the split of ZAPU, now we're having ZANU and ZAPU, which in itself contributes to some of the breeding grounds through which the narrative of tribalism and the narrative of difference is shaping Zimbabwe's trajectory. And you continue to see this happening in various forms. And I would then sometimes, this is where I borrow from some of the readings where they talk of invention of tribalism, right? Achimafeja talking about the invention of tribalism, where for the purposes of pursuing particular interests, you'd find that categories of people are created and identities are forged. And those identities begin to inform the political interests of actors in our society. So at this current juncture, we are noticing the labeling of people as rogue apples or stale apples. And once there's that label created, the response is going to be different. So yes, in the context of Zimbabwe, I mean, there is already writing where we talk about Zimbabweans do not exist. We've not yet emerged, and we are a state in transition, and the people within the state have not yet been given the platform to emerge and to define the kind of society they want. You find 2013 through the constitution process, when you watch the proceedings that were happening, there was already a narrative that had been shaped by the government, and it was just a by the way, trying to tick the boxes. Hence, you are finding now in 2020, there is already reversal to all those things that were put in the constitution, which should have been one of the starting points in which we begin to reimagine Zimbabwe. So I would say, we are a society born out of colonial legacy that has enabled particular leaders to continue to benefit from the system and to entrench even much deeper divisions politically for their self-enrichment. And that's where the major challenge in Zimbabwe lies. And the moment you begin to want to contest or to challenge or even want to have a share of the pie, you are then labeled, which I think was one of the issues when we look in the early 1980s. Part of the contestation started around how the demobilization program was being done, who gets what role within the Zimbabwe National Army. And in those, moments of engagement, people then begin to disagree, and to silence one another, you then have others being called dissidents. So that space for engagement has not yet been shaped in Zimbabwe, and you see it currently. When people want to engage, they're exterminated. And there is, in my view, continuity of coloniality entrenched deeply in the system that was created by colonial administrators, and it has become a benefit to the current ruling elite, which they continue to use for their own enrichment, just as colonial rulers were using the system for self-enrichment. And that is the sad thing we would be noticing in Zimbabwe, if I could put it that way.
Ruth, I'm not sure if we lost Malaika because of the bad connection, or is she still here? Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I see Lishle has a question, so I'm going to allow her to speak. Lishle?
Hello.
Lishle? We have connectivity issues all around. Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, is Malaika back?
No, Lisa said it was a mistake. It was a mistake.
Okay, got it. Okay, so Malaika, you can go ahead.
Yeah, it was a mistake. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so you can ask Ruth your next question or make your next comment.
I am here. Can you not hear me?
We can. I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Ruth, I'm pretty. Yes.
Yes, dear. I missed.
Okay, no, that's okay. So I'm very, Dr. Ruth, very interested in this issue of accountability, right? And particularly as pertains to Zimbabwe, because one of the things that we are seeing in Zimbabwe, right? Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things that has, African countries in general have in the main been battling, many of them have been battling with transitional justice, right? It is not unique. It is not unique to Zimbabwe. Countries such as the DRC, countries such as Burundi, countries such as Liberia and Sierra Leone have also been, over the years, been battling with their own context of peace negotiations, of transitional justice, and so on. And I think one of the things that has been very particular about Zimbabwe, and it's not just Zimbabwe, it's common with other African countries as well, except for a very few, has been that at the heart of why we are seeing a failure of the realization of this justice is that there is a culture of impunity that has become very entrenched, right? So the culture of impunity that is entrenched in Zimbabwe is a culture of impunity that you speak about, for example, the failure of lack of accountability for the Matebele and impunity even before that. In the post-2000 violence, there's been a culture of impunity where you have seen those who have been committing crimes against ordinary citizens not only not being prosecuted, but in very many cases also being, elevated to very senior officials in government. And I mean, very recently we had the I mean, when President Robert Mugabe was removed from power, there was, general excitement about the prospect of transitional justice. But we clearly see that from the very beginning, when you strike an agreement between the military and the outgoing president, and a deal that exempts the president from prosecution for crimes that he committed in his year in office, already there you begin to see that even the hope that we might have had for transitional justice already becomes eroded, because in the absence of holding people accountable, you can't therefore then meaningfully have justice, right? And that is why I think in very many ways we see in Zimbabwe that the state continues to facilitate and to have this monopoly of violence and to use it very deliberately. Today, as we speak, we've got journalists like Hopewell who are languishing in prison, who are continuously being denied access to justice. But that's only because there has been historically a tendency that has been deeply entrenched institutionally to not hold people accountable. I wonder though that, and of course, while it is important that we engage on the many ways in which transitional justice can be sought and achieved at very basic agencies of socializations in the homes and in the communities, something though must be said about how this lack of, this culture of impunity politically and in the institutions is not only weakening institutions in Zimbabwe that could facilitate justice, but that really it creates a cycle where, we are continuously seeing the violence being meted out. We are continuously going to have a situation in which the political powers that are, that are going to continuously use the margin of terror to institutionalize and perpetuate, the violence, both political and otherwise, in the Zimbabwean society. So I mean, what are we looking at? What are our thoughts around how, at the level of the stabilization of institutions in Zimbabwe, justice and transitional violence can be sought?
Okay. So in literature, they talk about, how it is premature to implement transitional justice mechanisms at a state level when we've not yet witnessed political transition in terms of the composition of the political body within the state, which unfortunately is the case in Zimbabwe, where we have not yet witnessed that transition. So what we then observe is piecemeal actions being taken. So things such as the global political agreement in 2008 really was just patching up an already wounded society by putting a plaster without necessarily attending to the wound underneath the plaster. So you then also see in 2017, we then sanitize, a military coup by calling it a military-assisted transition, which then normalizes what in itself was a coup, and also puts Zimbabwe in a new trajectory where the securitization of the state is not only engineered by the police, but actually is being spearheaded by the military. We are now deeply entrenched in a military state. So what we're observing is in itself an impediment to the talk of transitional justice, especially at an institutional level, where we want to see mechanisms that are state-led administering that transitional justice, or holding so-called perpetrators to account. This in itself is not necessarily unique to Zimbabwe. We've seen it also, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where many of the states in Europe, the European bloc, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where it became difficult for people to talk of transitional justice, and the easiest route was to talk about amnesty. And we've seen in Zimbabwe where there's been use of amnesties to try and maintain political stability. So because of those amnesties, there's almost a silence to talk about the atrocities that happened, because people have been pardoned and they are protected by the amnesty. So one of the things that almost are immediately required in the context of Zimbabwe when we want to talk of transition, or even to see mechanisms of transitional justice instilling that accountability, is a repeal of the amnesties that have been instituted, which in themselves block perpetrators of, or even alleged perpetrators of violence being brought to the books. So those are some of the things that are an impediment to transitional justice in Zimbabwe at an institutional level, because law has been used to perpetrate violence, and law has been used to protect perpetrators of violence from being held to account. But what then emerges from the book is how, in spite of the ignorance of political actors to this dire need to hold, to bring about justice, or even rebuild harmony within communities, you found that communities have begun to foster that justice on their own, through their own mechanisms, relying on their cultural values and beliefs, where they do know that, for example, if you've committed a crime such as murder, you've not only, committed that crime against the state, but you've committed it against their conscience, against their being. And we've seen it even, in some instances where, spirit-led demands for justice have actually ended up causing political actors to actually take action and repair the violence that they've done. I've spoken before about the case of Moses Chokuda, who died through political violence, and demanded through his spirit and his family, even facilitated that process where the perpetrators are held to account, and reparations were offered, and only when that was done that his spirit came to rest, and also his body could be buried. So we continue to see this in our society, where people are now, they do know that even if it was a national justice process that was done, it would not be sufficient. So they are more and more relying on their cultural practices and their customary processes of justice to try and hold each other to account. That's why you'd find there is, great acknowledgement of Mweyawe Ngozi, which is the avenging spirit, and the need to appease the avenging spirit. Of course, there are in some instances, controversies around how the appeasement is done, where there were cases, or there would be cases, in some cases where the appeasement would be done through the offering of a virgin woman or young woman. But you're finding increasingly when some of those appeasements are actually being done, the symbolism of it is how, there's acknowledgement on the part of the wrongdoer, and even the family of the wrongdoer being dragged through this process of rebuilding harmony, because people are still related through their clan lines, and they do have, in as much as people are now more, you'd say, cosmopolitan, there is still reference to their clan lines, and the need to maintain some of that cultural sense of belonging in their everyday life. So you'd find that things such as murder would not be taken lightly, and there's that great urgency to repair where there has been murder that has been committed, and to ensure that Mweyawe Ngozi does not come to cause havoc to their family. And we've seen with the case of Moses Chokuda where that was done, and we're seeing now, as I cover in the book, where there are instances where they are already seeing some of the wrongdoers, trying to find ways to come back and make amends for what happened, because of how their customary practices through spiritism have a way of recalling actors of violence to appease and to amend the harm that they have caused. And in doing so, it brings back harmony to the community. And we begin to see that for them is more effective than just seeing somebody being sent to prison. So the question lies in, when we're saying we're holding somebody to account, are we holding them to account on the basis of state laws, or we're holding them to account on the basis of the needs and the justice expectations of the wounded communities or the wounded persons, which, as emerges in the book, you find that spirit-led interventions have a lot more bearing and long-lasting, recourse for them than just, the state taking people to account.
Dr. Ruth, you speak about very interestingly about some of the mechanisms that are used in communities, and you spoke just now, and I'd like you to to touch a bit briefly on that, around some of the practices that are used that have that are, as you correctly say, are quite controversial, right? Including, for example, the use of, for example, a virgin woman as an offering and so on. And I wonder that in our quest to reimagine transitional justice and to center the experiences, the histories, the spiritual beliefs of people in our pursuit of it, what do we make then of I don't want us to touch on it briefly because I think it's
I think I missed the last part of your question, Malaika.
that there are practices that we use in our family, in my community in the Free State, where we we engage in what I would regard as our traditional practices of seeking justice, of seeking
Just maybe to respond from the part that I managed to get from you, Malaika dear. So in chapter, in the 4th chapter of the book, I touch on some of the practices that communities resort to. But what is important as we trying to understand, community-based or customary-based or tradition-based practices of justice is not to also think of them as something that is static and archaic and embedded, in something that was, many centuries ago, taking place many centuries ago, or that old, but rather it's about the current existence of people and the everyday practices that they follow, which are embedded in their values, which are embedded in their sense of being, and how these then help them create symbols of justice, and as well as processes of justice for which they they can hold each other to account. So if we're thinking, for example, of something such as appeasing the avenging spirit, which is kuripirangozi, this happens when somebody has died unlawfully. If we're looking at issues of political violence in Zimbabwe, some people are being murdered, and when somebody has died unlawfully, people are born and they can die, but there is a respectable or acceptable way of dying, which people would then say this was their time. But when there's a sense that their life has been cut short because of someone's hand in administering violence that then causes their death, you find then people are greatly disturbed by that, because it has robbed the sense of humanity that the others has, the rights that somebody has. Here now borrowing from the rights discourse, where you all have a right to life. And now if we're saying somebody has been murdered, right, they've died at the hands of another person causing harm on them. People believe in that their spirit, because you're a living being, once you die, there are cultural processes that are conducted to bury a person, and this includes even speaking to your body and speaking to your spirit, helping to inform your spirit what is happening. The same way when somebody is born, they speak to you and they speak to your spirit to welcome you into the world. The same way as you are dead, it is your body that is buried on the ground, but your spirit remains because you are a living being. You have a living spirit, and when that spirit remains, it ascends. And when I'm saying ascends, it's basically it continues to be existing in the cosmos, where you are part now of the metaphysical community, where there are other persons of your own clan, of your own people who have preceded you, who are no longer with us, who have departed. You are reunited with those persons and become an actor within the metaphysical realm, contributing to the well-being of the community. But it is difficult for your spirit to transcend and be connected with the metaphysical community when you are burdened. And the burden here is about the anger that one carries. When you are being inflicted harm, it's not like you'll be smiling. No, somebody would actually be hurting and crying, and their spirit is broken and they are wounded. That kind of pain actually continues to live on the spirit of the person. Now, as they are a metaphysical being, as a living spirit, and it will continue to haunt the perpetrators of violence, because when it is a burdened spirit, it cannot take part in activities with the other living spirits, who preceded it, because it's a heavy spirit. It is burdened. So there is need now for rituals to allow the spirit to give forgiveness, and also to reconcile, for the perpetrator to be reconciled with the person for whom they have done any wrongdoing. Now, as we think about how this is done, you find that within the communities, because they do believe that you just don't die and you're gone, you no longer exist. No, you continue to exist, but in a different form. So because human beings are considered to have a spirit in them, and they continue to exist in a different form, they then need to perform processes of remedy, which in any case are also performed. Let's say you're still living. How if you beat somebody and they talk of you've caused somebody harm, they talk of vamaropa, and because somebody has been hurt and they bleed, in their custom, you need to compensate them through you have to offer a bull, right, to appease the person that you have wounded. And in that process, the bull becomes not only a symbolic token of your acknowledgement of the harm that you've done, but for the people that have been hurt, they could also even use the bull for their own medical expenses. You can sell the bull, and then you can pay for your medical expenses and things like that. You can even use the bull for productivity in your own home. Let's say through farming, and yet you may have been hurt and you are no longer productive. So those are way of ensuring that the life of somebody is not cut short or even becomes redundant because at the hands of someone else. Hence, they have ways of holding each other to account. Now, in the instance where somebody has actually died, the compensation that is offered in the form, now they mostly rely on compensating using a bull, which is, for them, bull is wealth. So you're actually parting with your wealth, and as you're parting with your wealth, wealth is power. Wealth, has status. You are actually laying yourself bare to reconcile with others, because at the time you were doing your acts of violence or injustice, you were considering yourself to be superior, to have so much power, but you are allowing yourself to actually be at par with the people that you have done wrong to. But not only that, through that compensation, you are renewing their status even in community, because there is something even symbolic that can be looked at, which people would then associate with. So it is from those exchanges that people, have a way of reconciling with one another and balancing the scale of inequalities that happen when an injustice is perpetrated. Hence, they find a lot of, they find a lot of meaning in those processes of justice, because there's something tangible for them, and there's also a renewal of their essence in those in those processes. This is just to give an example of one justice process that people make use of.
Okay. I'm looking at questions that have come in. I'm going to just look at one now from, I'd like you to please, Dr. Ruth, respond to the question by Ed Muroiwa, who is asking, can we then say the government of national unity was a missed opportunity at transitional justice on a national level?
Okay, thank you, Ed Muroiwa. I would say, the government of national unity, as far as, addressing the political tensions that were there, or the antagonism that was there, managed to bring political actors to the table. We're now talking about how regional organizations, or even within the prescriptions of the UN and the AU, they always talk of intervening through dialogue and trying to ensure that there's first that diplomatic effort to ensure actors, find one another. And I would say that's a great thing about the GNU, that it did fit the book prescription on how to intervene in cases of political instability or political crisis, which is, unfortunately for Zimbabwe, has been something that's going on for too long. And you left then to wonder, how much a benefit the GNU was if the roadmap that emerged from the GNU has not been fulfilled to the letter or to the core. You find the things that were done through the GNU was mostly establishment of what they called, joint JOMIC, which was a platform where political actors and in some ways civil society actors were able to contribute, but mostly it was a political engagement. And this, I would argue, it really ignored who at the bottom of all these tensions is affected. So this is something that's constantly acknowledged in literature, that most of the interventions or most of the resolutions to the political tensions we are seeing in our societies today are consistently being limited to engagement at the national level. And they is in communities who are affected by those acts of violence or by the crisis that would be happening. And you end up, political actors, when they come in for those deliberations, all thinking about how do I get the best pie, out of this, meal that we are consistently thinking about is how much am I going to get out of this? And there's often resist building and trying to center themselves around are in themselves a threat to the existence of humanities. Where if you look at Zimbabwe's post-1980 trajectory, where the establishment of patriotic history, the liberation struggle being the basis on which one is identified and even given a political standing. Your stamina as a political actor is grounded in your contribution to the liberation struggle, as if the liberation struggle is the only struggle that Zimbabwe has faced or Zimbabwe is facing. For the longest time, Zimbabwe has been in struggle, and there are different kinds of struggles that Zimbabweans have been facing, but there's often a rhetoric and overbearing narrative of the liberation struggle as if it's the only struggle that Zimbabwe has faced. And if that then continues to be the benchmark on which political action is taken and inaction occurs, then I would say the GNU did not do much in terms of creating and in terms of holding people to account, because if anything, there was also a silencing of the real issues on the ground, and the effort that was there mostly was towards building a new constitution, which now is not necessarily even serving people, because it's being trampled upon. So it is not a constitution that's going to necessarily save Zimbabwe, or even bring political reformation to Zimbabwe, or social reformation to Zimbabwe, but rather a new consciousness around who we are as human beings. How do we begin to think of ourselves as human beings, and where is the value of Ubuntu? Where is the value of our humanity? Because if that is not the center at which we begin to see and recognize each other, the labeling will always continue. And it is through this labeling that inaction would persist, and some actions being taken on by political leaders. And that in itself ignores the needs of people on the ground around, values of cooperation, values of respect, values of communitarian, which are consistently coming out which were consistently coming out in the engagement, in the engagements that I had with people on the ground. And there's even a notion of Matengana Gudo, where people, they talk of, your existence is not just about, who you are, but your identity is intertwined to the identities of others. So you'd find in one instance you could be an aunt, but in another instance you could actually be considered a sister-in-law, you could be considered a mother, and things like that. And if we then see that we are interconnected and we are all humanity, then we'll be able to overlook those blinkers that have been created by a patriotic narrative of what it means to be Zimbabwean, which is what failed to be dismantled with the GNU. I don't know if Malaika, do you want me to also respond to the question by John Mashaya?
Yes, Ruth, you can go ahead.
Okay, John says, are the current challenges around transitional justice in Zimbabwe, speaking to an imagined post-colonial nation state grounded on problematic nationalist imagination and liberation war habits that do not speak to basic statecraft? I think your question, John, touches on some of the things I was just alluding to around how part of the biggest challenge in Zimbabwe is the nationalist rhetoric, which in itself engenders a lot of violence and excludes some of the underlying communal practices and beliefs and ways of relating with each other, ways of understanding humanity that has no bearing on political ideologies or even the liberation history. If anything, part of the ways in which people were recruited into the liberation struggle was, through their family lines. So it is often disturbing that the family values are often trampled upon when we're trying to reimagine Zimbabwe and what future it ought to be because of political interests that are serving particular elite groups over the rest of the community. But I would say possibly there is hope for Zimbabwe if we're looking at the power that the community still has in giving identity and sense of belonging to persons. And possibly that, in my view, is a place that needs to be tapped into, going back to the values of Ubuntu and what it means to have respect for human dignity. It would take away some of the clouding of the identities that are created by the nationalist liberation war rhetoric.
I'm not sure if Tokozani is still with us, but I just want to see, because I think they had a question. Okay, no. Maleka, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Okay, I see a comment in the chat where there's mentioned that since this seems highly top-down, do you think the RECs and member states will have sufficient buy-in to ensure its successful implementation at local and community levels? Okay, I'm just gonna also match the two questions. The other one from Erin says, what do you think lies at the core of uprooting the transforming polarization in Zimbabwe, which sadly is embedded at all levels, despite its manipulation at elite levels? I would say in the case of Zimbabwe, if we to look at whether there would be buy-in of people-led processes of justice, which would be more inclusive, centered on values of the community, as opposed to state-led transitional justice processes. I think, yes, whilst the AU now has a policy document on it, and even SADC does have a policy document which recognizes the need for allowing customary-based processes to inform transitional justice initiatives. What we tend to observe more and more is that at the end of it all, there's still a lot of power given to the state to decide how transitional justice would occur, which, if we're looking in the context of Zimbabwe, you find states respond to the need for transitional justice being in some ways indifferent, because if it was necessarily serious, things such as the Peace Commission would have the funding that it requires to actually foster transitional justice, and even because the Peace Commission in its documentation has a sense of acknowledging the need for customary-based or community-based processes being deployed, not necessarily to say customary and community-based means necessarily the same, but rather to say allowing people-driven initiatives to drive, processes of transitional justice or processes of justice. But what we often have been noticing now is that, because some of the perpetrators of the violence are, political actors who are still in office, there's a way of silencing any efforts to do transitional justice. I mean, if you're looking at the communities, when I was engaging with them, initially there was a bit of hesitation to talk about what happened during the periods 2000 to 2008 in relation to electoral violence. But as they warmed up and we became much more familiar with one another, you began to hear people opening up to say how organically some of these things have been playing out. So it's quite uncertain as to whether some of these initiatives could be, something that is engineered or, done with the hand of the state, because in most cases they are happening organically, and it's part of their everyday living. What I think would be important in as far as trying to allow people to address their past injustices is to do away with the surveillance that's there within our societies, which I think is in some way, to answer Erin, is one of the major challenges at the core of what is perpetuating violence in Zimbabwe, the sense of fear of being watched, of being monitored, to the point that probably one now could be saying, okay, as much as we've published this book, as much as I'm talking about what has happened on the ground, wouldn't know whether next time I travel home, I would be, there will be somebody after me, or there could be somebody after me now, because we're talking about how people are affected by violence. So it's that sense of fear which has been entrenched by political actors, and through monopoly of violence, where, because the government has monopoly of violence, where they use their monopoly of violence to entrench fear in society and to entrench acts of violence in society, is something I think is one of the fundamental things that would need to be attended to in order to pave way for a more conducive environment, for even if at a national level there will be the peace commission taking place, people who participate in those processes would not need to feel intimidated. I recall participating in the public hearings of the National Peace and Reconciliation Bill, where some of the, among other participants would be saying, the challenge in Zimbabwe is that there is recognition that we have freedom of speech, but there is no freedom after the speech. And you tend to also notice that that sense of there's no freedom after speech means there's silencing of people, and there's a sense of being surveyed, which is at the core of the challenges that Zimbabweans are facing. And if some of those things are addressed, it would mean a sense of being able to hold the state to account, and ensuring that there's a balance of power between state organs, including the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. But it's often difficult to achieve in the current context of Zimbabwe, because the legislature, its majority is the ruling party, so they have a way of even making amendments and changes to the constitution arbitrarily. You would find you noticing with the judiciary also being captured, and the executive, by its nature, it's already pursuing particular interests. And those are some of the key challenges in Zimbabwe, where the monopoly of violence for the longest time has remained in the hands of particular elite groups, and a transformation to this elitist kind of politicking and elitist kind of political organizing would actually bring a bit of change to Zimbabwe, because much of what perpetuates the cycle of violence is the contestation to win the next round of election. And once an election is done, people are already preparing for how to safeguard themselves for the next round. I see there's a comment here. Is it safe to say the failure to implement transitional justice in Zimbabwe is a failure by SADC member states, where revolutionary parties are going mute because they would need backing in the event of same scenarios in individual states? you know, there's a history about political organizations in Africa that I think needs to be tapped into quite seriously, especially if we're looking at you know, the links between ANC in South Africa and the rest of the continent. You know, we do know some form of, you know, back in the day during the colonial period, and also the struggle to end apartheid, when ANC was formed, it had chapters, it has versions of itself in the form of chapters in Zimbabwe, in Kenya, in Zambia, in Malawi. We continue to see that across the continent, and those ties in some ways there's still a lot of memory that forges a camaraderie approach in how in how political actors respond to issues of violence and violations in states within the SADC body. And I would want to think probably tapping more into that history is going to enable us to understand what are the underlying powers, links, networks, and culture within political organizations that continue to hinder, you know, state actors to fulfill the mandates that they have, especially if you're looking at how even SADC and the AU already have set policies and principles and protocols that should be followed when there are clear acts of human rights violations, and the member states are expected to hold each other to account. But of course, that necessarily does not happen. And a complication to that is that we have an absence of an international, a regional actor with overarching power over others, by the nature that nation states have their own sovereignty, and they have their own autonomy, which in some ways is misused, because sovereignty also means responsibility. And it is clear when that responsibility is creating harm on the citizenry, then there is a need for a much more different intervention. Literature already tells us how there was more cooperation during the fight to end colonialism, you know, and it seems colonialism might have been the only enemy they thought of, and they never thought of themselves, political actors, as potential enemies to their own people. And whenever there is challenge to their authority, or even the way in which they are conducting business of the state, then the perception would be those who are challenging are now the enemy, which is a reverse of what was happening during the fight to end colonialism, or the fight to end apartheid, where the state would then be saying those are challenging the authority of the ruling government are enemies to the state. And yet when they were challenging the authority of the state, they were considering the actors the enemy. So trying to dig deeper into how much colonial baggage has been entrenched in the psyche of the political actors we have today would help us to even dig deeper into why there is in some ways inaction where action is required at a sub-regional and even continental level from the different bodies that are there. I'm going to attend to Vengai Mukonowe Shuro. What needs to be done to change the political culture in Zimbabwe, considering sorry, I was still reading. Considering we also see overtones of violence and acute hatred within the opposition circles as well, what can be done to fix the language which happens to fuel political violence in the country? I suppose what I would think as a starting ground is to try and have that recognition that we are all humanity, and to understand that even if at the family level, tensions are there. People do fight at a family level. You would never necessarily all have same way of understanding things or same approach to dealing with issues. But there's often need to recognize that we are all human beings and we need to find a common ground. And I think because the politics we tend to see in Zimbabwe is centered around a zero-sum game, you'd find that even any means possible becomes a way of ensuring that there's a win, a win outcome to the political rallying, or that would be the end. You then see the emergence of even what I would consider as bizarre actions in how people respond to their differences of opinion around what they aspire for in Zimbabwe. And because political organization or even democracy has been centered around political leadership and political organizations competing for the vote of the electorate, we will continue to almost see this bickering happening, and it would take people going a step back and asking themselves deeply, what is it that makes me different from the other person? Except there's particular interests that I'm trying to preserve, and in what ways would my interests not exist if this other person is party to the pie? Because there's an assumption that, of course, we have limited resources and people are competing for those resources, but does it necessarily mean we have to destroy our humanity for the sake of accumulating resources, which I think is one of the key challenges we're facing in Zimbabwe. And a lot of harm has been done through that, and people have lost a sense of identity.
Thank you. Maleka, would you just like to wrap the session up? Malika, are you still there? Okay. Well, Dr. Ruth, are you here? Are you back?
Thank you very much. Samantha, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay. So I was saying, I was thanking Dr. Ruth very much for her very comprehensive response to the questions that were posed to her. And I'm especially very thankful that she, made, drew the very important linkages between the quest for transitional justice in Zimbabwe and in South Africa, because that was, in fact, going to be my final question to you, because I do think that although obviously there are very different and specific histories and specific political realities, there are some very important salient lessons that can be learned about, how we fashion justice, how we imagine justice taking place in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. Because even as we might not be having a state that, behaves in specific ways like it does in Zimbabwe, there are very, serious cases of conflict in communities in South Africa, cases that do require a new imagination around what justice must look like. And I'm thinking of this particularly in rural areas in the country, such as in areas like Xolobeni, in the Eastern Cape, in the entirety of the Amatiba tribal authority, where you do see these growing tensions between communities who want to maintain their way of being, their way of existing, and the way of thinking about the world congruent with their own spiritual and philosophical ideas, how these have often been at odds with the way that the state has sought to impose its ideas around spatial justice, its ideas around environmental, economic. And so listening to the work that you have done, listening to what the book is offering, I do see beyond just what it's telling us about the Zimbabwean realities, how that too finds its own linkages with South Africa. And I think that for me is very deeply profound. It's very deeply profound because it obviously gives us lessons about, the reflections that we need to make about our own quest for justice, about our own understanding of the importance of centralizing the experiences and the lived realities of ordinary people in the fashioning of a higher civilization that we seek to do. So I do want to thank you, Dr. Ruth. I do want to thank all the people who have participated in this discussion. And we definitely do look forward to having your book in our hands. Your publisher is very strict about giving us access to that book, and I do certainly look forward to having that in our hands as soon as possible. And if I'll give you, if there's anything more that you'd like to say as your closing remarks, whether it's around the book or any of the questions or reflections that you would like to make about this topic, I'll give you that, and then we can close the session.
Thank you so much, Malaika. I think you've summed up for me. I mean, anybody interested in acquiring a copy of the book, it is available on Palgrave Macmillan website. That's one of the avenues through which you can purchase the book. But also, if you look through exclusive books, they can also sent through the book if you purchase it through exclusive books, and also if on Amazon you're able to purchase a copy of the book. It is my hope that also even in our WITS library we would soon have a copy, and people who are not necessarily able to purchase a copy of the book would be able to read it through from the library. But indeed, this is a book that it would be of great benefit to people interested in understanding Zimbabwe much more, but also people doing political science studies, people working on peace studies, and also people looking at studies such as law and alternative ways of justice, and what it means to be doing to rebuilding human relations. So it's in that context where people from different fields, even such as psychology, social work, people who are dealing with wounded communities and or people who've experienced harm, how do we begin to imagine alternative ways in which the approach to rebuilding people who have been affected by those injustices or violations is centered on the people themselves. So that's, I think, one of the key takes that the book offers, and tries to center justice on human relations, because at the end of the day, humanity thrive when we are in relation with each other. We are relational beings, and how do we repair our relations when they have been wounded by violence? That's, I think, the take from the book.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. A very special thanks to Malaika. We really appreciate your insights and your feedback. And, you persevered throughout a very challenging connection. So we're so grateful for your time and your energy. To Dr. Ruth, congratulations on this book, on your work. And we look forward to having many copies at WSG as well. Good afternoon, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.